Better. Good. All right, so welcome. Hi, I'm Marc. I may soon be running the social computing group. Currently run the community technologies group. Our goals are very much aligned, obviously, with the interests of this group today. And I'll show you a little bit about our projects that are ongoing. And shortly thereafter, you'll hear from Shelly about Social Computing Group 1.0's current projects, and they'll be merging. Many people come here and they would like an overview of MSR. There you go. And that was it. So to give you a sense of how my team is organized, in many ways we take as our rubric, our core goal, the study and development of tools for computer-mediated collective action. Collective action is clearly the central concern of many parts of the social sciences, in particular sociology. And it comes in various flavors. I draw from three broad traditions: collective action dilemma theory, social network theory, and interactionist sociologies. And those would be the legacies of Goffman, Garfinkel, Bloomer, Schutz, Sachs. If you're nodding, great. We're members of the same tribe. If not, people who care deeply about how do you do walking past another person in a hallway? How do you do leave takings? How do you do openings of conversations? All of which have to be translated in one way or another into the online realm. One of the common themes of our projects is that we are looking at mechanisms for social interaction that leave log files. Lots of log files. So we are very busy data mining all of Usenet, for example, or data mining all of your email, for another example. And when you data mine this, you end up with, well, frankly, terabytes of data that are no more useful than the original petabytes of data that you started with. So it's going to take some kind of information visualization techniques, at least for me, to get a lot of value out of these data sets. So we're also moving into both desktop and mobile systems, and I'll talk about both NetScan, UseNetViews, and Project Aura. So social cyberspaces, they're everywhere, and there's more of them every day. You turn around and there's a whole nother genre. You know, the great thing about this business is that you get to say words like wiki and blog, and nobody says stop doing the Python routines. The newest, of course, is Mososo. Mososo is not a tequila drink with mint. That's the mojito. Mososo, mobile social software, probably the new big thing where essentially, here, you know, these devices are essentially becoming Swiss Army knives of sensors with network connectivity. I think we're all drawn to the fact that about 1.5 billion humans are going to be hauling the equivalent of a supercomputing radio station with them wherever they go. If not already, then very, very soon. So lots of different modalities of social association and interaction on the net. How can we systematically study them? So we've been looking at threaded conversation repositories in general, and Usenet in particular, broadening out to things like web boards now. And these are the data structures that are present there. There are authors, there are threads, there are conversations, there are news groups, the repositories for these things, all pulled together by the message. We data mine a lot of that, and we publish our results, and you can go and have a look at these things at netscan.research.microsoft.com, where we provide a social accounting search engine, a report of social accounting metadata about authors, threads, news groups. And we do this largely because I really wanted to. But we thought that maybe other people would care, and indeed we've been spending a lot of time refining this system as a tool for participants in news groups to use for various tasks like discovery of new places, or the selection of content, or the evaluation of content, or for that matter, the motivation to contribute more content, as in why would anybody answer anybody else's question in Usenet, or for that matter, any other environment. So we've been building these tools, and they are publicly available. A lot of what we're trying to do is provide tools that will allow you to actually track the health and vitality of an online community to support the growth of these environments. And we provide a bunch of tools. Here you can see our selection guides. These are ways of picking people or threads to read by certain social accounting metadata about them. Like, is this a really big thread? Or is this an author who comes here frequently and mostly replies to others rather than starting big flame wars? It's not that we're against big flame wars. We just figured you might want them or want to avoid them depending on your task. And it would be nice to have social interfaces that are aware of the differences in these systems. The other thing is that we are a kind of reputation system, a way of making behavioral histories manifest, visible, a theme I think that you'll find peppered across the room. A lot of people interested in looking at these log files and bringing the pattern to the surface. So we also are looking at bringing the pattern to the surface through visual tools. We currently produce a suite of applications. We call it, well, an umbrella application that takes a suite of visualization components we call Usenet Views. Usenet Views brings together tree mapping tools, a scatter plot we call newsgroup crowds, a timeline visualization we call author lines, as well as a few others, including a thread visualizer designed by Gina Venolia. And our goal is to create a graphical browser for conversation databases. So, for example, here is a map of all of Usenet as a tree map. And those of you from Maryland, some of you may recognize tree maps. This is Ben Schneiderman's concept from the early 90s. We've adapted it and built a component that we can use to visualize all of Usenet and its hierarchical structure. Here, the area of a box indicates where messages went. The bigger the box, the more messages. And the color of the box indicates whether or not that number is higher or lower over the prior time period. So growth or decline. Green is growth, red is decline. Gives you a sense of the general proportion of what's going on in Usenet. It's worth noting that that is the Microsoft public hierarchy and the reason I'm employed. We do a lot of activity in the Microsoft public hierarchy. Just last year, 2 million unique participants contributed content in this environment, many of whom many others also drew value from these interactions without ever contributing. So the silent searchers, probably 10 times, maybe 20 million people, drawing content out of these environments, 2 million people asking and answering questions of one another. Here is a view of the Microsoft public hierarchy, one where you could see that, well, for example, most of the world's languages are very well represented here. We've got German, French, Spanish, and Visual Basic. Also emerging Chinese. I hear that's a popular language. Here we can also look down inside of, if we were to open a box, what would we see? We could look inside of a newsgroup. And here, this tool called Newsgroup Crowds, developed by Fernanda Viegas here in the front row, also known as scatterplot. Fernanda didn't tell us that it was also scatterplot, but we're okay with that. And here, each bubble is an author in a newsgroup in a time period. And we're actually seeing a 5-year history of the life of a newsgroup. And this newsgroup is a technical support newsgroup. And it has a particular pattern that allows us to see, oh, in fact, these are people essentially asking a question and getting an answer from an expert. The experts are up here at the top. We call this the answer person plume. The people who are here almost every day. The vertical axis is how many days are you here in a time period. Horizontal axis, how chatty are you? How many messages do you put into a thread? And what we find is people are not terribly chatty, and there are a hardcore population of people who are here almost every day. Let's contrast this then with a different kind of news group, very different kind of pattern, a different kind of crowd. And our key message here is that social cyberspaces are not all the same. They're at least as varied as physical social spaces. If I was back in grad school and I said, well, I'm doing an ethnography of a social space, you might say, well, could you be more vague? Yet we can get away with saying, well, I'm going to study a social cyberspace. Well, which kind? And so we're engaged in the beginnings of a taxonomic exercise to say, well, news groups are of a type based on the presence of authors of a type. So what kinds of authors are there? Well, clearly, there's some that come a lot, some who don't, some who are chatty, some who aren't. We have other visualizations to capture some of these dimensions. Here, if you were to open a bubble, what would you see? The parents in the room say, Pokemon. The others say, what? So here, what we have is a double-sided histogram. Red bubbles indicate messages this one author initiated. They started a new thread. Blue bubbles, they replied to an existing conversation. So we can look at a year in the life of a single author and say of this person, wow, heavy initiation, heavy reply. The bigger the bubble, the more messages this person put into that thread in that week, and therefore a not trivial conversationalist. Gets into big bubbles. Is this like most authors? Well, no, actually, most authors are one bubble, one red bubble above the line, and that's it. 2/3 of all authors post once, only once, never again, always, well, 93% of the time an initial turn, never reply. This is the person they're seeking. Those singletons want to meet this person. This is Kelly at mvps.org, one of the most prolific answer people on the internet, at least in Usenet. Kelly, of her own volition, spent the time necessary to generate 16,000 answers in 2004. an amazing thing. And she is a very savvy provider of technical support for the Windows XP platform. If you have a question, there's a very good chance that you're going to post that question, and Kelly will answer you. Very, very valuable. So it's worth noting just how different these two types of people are. Conversationalist, answer person. How many other types of people are there out there? Well, we just mentioned, drive-by, singleton, one dot, one red dot somewhere above the line. 3 kinds of people. How many others are there? Lurkers. Complete no dots whatsoever. There you go. At least we know what they look like. So one other way to pivot is to say, well, this is great, but did she answer all one person? To many people? Let's go take a look at the social network diagrams, and here being built out of the Jung framework, developed by Danielle Fisher, amongst others, we're starting to see patterns of connection in news groups. These are patterns we think are prevalent in other threaded conversation environments as well. Things that start to pop out of these visualizations are roles. Roles like answer person. This person here, this person here. People we are defining as answer people are not just that they reply a lot and don't initiate, but now they are defined as people of high degree, which is to say they have many connections to others, and that those others are people who have low degree. They are people who don't connect. So you'll see that these lines go outwards from an individual to others who themselves never reply to anybody else. A way of empirically deriving who are these people. It's also worth noting that we can actually start to characterize different news groups by the prevalence of their social structures. Here in a technical support news group, you get a histogram that shows the out degree of egos alters, which is to say we picked an answer person. We're saying, who are the people they talk to? Do they talk to a lot of people? Not in this news group. This person replies to people predominantly who don't reply to anybody. Compare that to alt.flame, where people don't reply to people who don't reply to people. Okay? In alt.flame, you're mostly going to reply to the people who get replied to by others. So it's a cliquish news group. And the absence or the shape of this curve here is in some ways the resistance factor for penetration, I'm sorry to say the word, into a news group. So here's alt.politics. Here you're going to have to hang out a little while, but they're more willing to slag off on you if you'll show up a couple of times and reply to other people. Here in alt support divorce, well, they're willing to meet newcomers, but they have a preference for the old-timers. I guess they have an interest in meeting new people. And then, of course, we can now pivot and look at the thread structures. I think there's a lot of work to be done in treating the thread as what it is, which is the core sociological data type of the Internet. More of us woke up this morning and contributed to threads. We'll go to bed tonight having just contributed to threads than any other data structure I can think of. I mean, where's the linked list? Well, it is a linked list. Okay, so I'm a sociologist, not a computer scientist. Anyway, so we're also looking at giving away all the components. So we built these components, and we think they have generic use, and they're available at the download site at download.research.microsoft.com. And we are eager to see other uses. We've seen a lot of people using the tree map tool, for example, to visualize wiki structures, bug trees, that kind of thing. We're also looking at pushing NetScan down into personal email, where rather than gobbling up all your personal email to our server, we are going to push our server down to your client and let it gobble up all of your email. We call that project SNARF, the Social Network and Relationship Finder. SNARF answers the challenge, you've got 180 pieces of unread mail, 18 minutes before your next meeting. Who should you read? And there's a good chance that the answer is people who I reply to a lot. And so SNARF tries to provide you with those kinds of tools, new handles to go, as we like to put it, beyond, from, and received as metadata of salience for email and other conversational data structures. We're also interested in the mobile space. The Mososo thing is a big deal for us. We're looking at the fact that these devices, wherever that may have been, are essentially becoming new kinds of mice, not the old kind of mice where you could click on pixels. The new kind of mouse is a device that you click on machine-readable tags. We've been building this thing we call AURA, the Advanced User Resource Annotation System, simply because it had to have an acronym. In AURA, you click on things, you get metadata about them, you can store that metadata, you can annotate that metadata. What's that look like in practice? Well, there are systems that are like this, like SpotMe, where it's all about finding people near you. Interesting. This is about finding people who are near to the products that you've also bought. So here we can interrogate a box of breakfast cereal and find out things that other people might have said about it that might be consequential. In this case, if you can read what Google will tell me, it says of the Kellogg's Cracklin' Oat brand that Kellogg USA has recalled Kellogg's Cracklin' Oat brand cereal products because they may, And I did follow that link. And the answer is eggs, milk, and almonds. There's the presence of ingredients that weren't on the label. So some interesting information for those who are allergic to eggs, milk, or almonds. I like to say that every object has a story to tell. And one of those stories is, if you eat me, I will kill you. We also store all of that data. As you go scanning things, we build what we call the My Aura page, all the things you've scanned and annotated. Here you can see a list of those. I can sort them in different ways, even drill down and begin to annotate both publicly and privately concepts and messages and ratings on these various objects. So some of Elmo's very best work, I must say. We also expose it as RSS because why wouldn't we? And there you go. So some of the projects from the current Community Technology, soon-to-be Social Computing group. You will hear more imminently from Shelly Farnham, who will tell you about other mobile and social applications.
Hello. Hello? Hello. All right. So I thought, given that we're about to merge the two groups into a bigger Ubra social computing group, I sort of talk about, give you a bird's eye view of what have we been doing over the past 5 years and the sort of evolution of ideas that's led to some of our current projects, and then focus on a couple of those current projects, what their status is. So it's sort of relating to what we were talking about this morning, defining social computing. We've had two areas of research, one looking more at the technology supporting social interactions, and the other the socially enhanced information processing. And the projects that are sort of prototyping around the socially enhanced information processing is sort of the body of work that Lily's taking with her when she goes into Longhorn. So what I'm going to be talking about today is more the first. I just want to say that sort of as a group, we sort of developed a style, as any group will, I'm sure, where basically we would have these team-based projects where they're very cross-disciplinary. We're really combining different skill sets, doing a lot of brainstorming based on the interest around the brainstorming, putting together these teams which integrate design, social science. I'm a social psychologist, as is Scott, computer science and development. And then our expectation is that we're exploring technologies, given what we know now about the affordances that are emerging, what should we be thinking about 2 to 10 years out? So again, just sort of over time and sometimes through our errors or problems that we encounter, we've developed a research process. So if you're sort of thinking, essentially our main mission is to help users meet their social goals, how do we do that as a research group? And we engage in all levels of this, going through design, prototyping, deployment and evaluation, and setting target users. And for any project, we could start at any point in the cycle and just spin around and keep spinning. And so I just wanted to say that some of the things that we've learned over the past few years, that there are some special issues or problems that you deal with when you're doing social computing prototyping. For example, in the design area, I think design is really important in social computing because you really develop very strong expectations about what you're supposed to do in a social space by the way it looks and feels. So as the colors, the flashiness of it will impact, am I supposed to have a very serious conversation here in a social support environment, or am I supposed to be teasing my fellow teenage buddies? And so we really need to think about design in a way that maybe you don't in some other kinds of applications. Prototyping, as much as possible, when doing prototyping, you really need to, just a lot of the problems that we've encountered is that there's a critical mass that you need in social applications. Like, it's not going to work if only my Mac friends or only my Windows friends can get into this application. And so you really need to think about how can you design software so that everybody can be included. And so that's why, for example, from a study perspective, we developed Wallop, one of our major projects, in Flash because we wanted to have a really rich user interface that everybody could use. It wasn't limited to just half of the population. And so this is a problem in general with social technologies, like how do you get that critical mass, or how do you get that exposure to everybody in a friendship network? And then in terms of deployment and evaluation, you always have to get it into the hands of the users because you're looking at social behavior, and until you're actually getting social behavior in your application, you're not going to understand how they're going to use it socially. And so we've run into some serious problems. Like when I first came to research, there was this sort of expectation I'd go into a laboratory and do studies, and you can only get 4 people into the laboratory at a time, so it really limited the scope of the kind of research that we would do. And so out of that, we developed an online laboratory where we could post applications, get lots of people using them. And so that's sort of been the style of our applications or our prototyping since then, is that we try to actually get it out into large numbers of users, study its usage in actuality, and then just observe a lot of the emergent properties of social behavior that happen in these social applications. And then finally, actually studying the target users. People are really different. They're really different across cultures, particularly in their social behavior. They're different across cultures. They're different across age groups. They're different across life stage. So, what your average teenager, how they think about social networks and how, your 50-year-old might think about social networks can be very different. Sometimes people are in contraction phase, and other people are in expansion phase. And so how they think about or want a social networking application is going to be very different depending on that life stage that they're in. And another thing that we always have to consider is even personality. Am I an introvert or an extrovert? Am I using technology to sort of help compensate for something that, like with the teenagers we were talking about earlier, some of the shy teenagers were really using these technologies to sort of play out and explore social behavior in a way that they couldn't face-to-face just yet. They're too shy. Whereas other people are really extroverted, and for them, the technology is all about figuring out ways to get face-to-face. So understanding that there are these different styles in the way that people use technologies is very important part of the process. And so what we would do is we would actually go and do questionnaire studies where we'd get people to tell us, how are you using social technologies in your life right now, and how should that be informing our designs? So again, from this retrospective view, I wanted to say, so starting in 2001, we're actually still the Virtual Worlds group under Linda Stone's management. And we were doing this project called Hush World, where what we did is we had, it was like a virtual environment with chat that we were given to cancer patients in outpatient treatment because they were, 10 minutes left? Okay. Because they were really isolated because of their immune systems were compromised, they didn't have access to their social environment the way that they normally would. And so the idea behind this application was provide people with this means for meeting and providing social support to each other. And one of the real lessons that we learned from that application was that, yes, people like to talk to other cancer patients, but when they're alone in this apartment, what they really wanted was access to their friends and family. That's what they really wanted. They loved the fact that we put these computers into their apartments much more than they loved the application that gave them access to other cancer patients. So this really influenced our thinking for the next 5 years. People want access to their friends and family. That's what they really care about the most. And that's what we really need to be thinking about when we're thinking about social technology. And then a related project right about that same time that really influenced our thinking for again, several years was we did this mall study where how do you think about your social reality and how should that influence our thinking? And so we actually had them fill out a questionnaire but also just draw their social life without any instructions, really. And we saw a lot of this kind of mapping lines, groups, and our main impression from that was, oh my God, people's social realities don't fall into my family and my friends and my coworkers. It's really dynamic. It's really fluid. every individual chunks very differently how they interact with their social space. So how can we, model? How do we model the user's experience? How do we bring that into our social application? So we're not like imposing a structure on them. We're letting their structure guide the user interface of the system. So this led to a whole series of projects, which I'm calling implicit networks here, or you can call dynamic networks. But the basic idea is that we're as much as possible trying to infer a social network or a social space depending on people's interaction behavior. Because if you understand that social networks do really change a lot, your relationships are very dynamic, and contact management is very difficult if your relationships are changing all the time. So what can we do automatically? What sort of inferences can we make about who's important to you, who you're interacting with, what kind of groups are you interacting with from your interaction behavior? And so, like I said, though, here, this is a personal map. This is from a few years ago, looking at clustering people depending, again, on who you tend to talk to together. Point to Point was a project where we looked at public conversation spaces within an organization. You can actually infer a lot about who's talking to who and who's working with who from these public spaces. We did a user study where we actually had, we printed out people's social network maps and had them, rate its accuracy. And we had really interesting reactions to that, like, oh my God, how did you figure this out? Like, did you scan my email? This is weird. And it was just actually from their public membership in the groups. It wasn't even conversation; it was just membership in groups, in these conversation groups. Inner circle. So this is a case where we're actually trying to take that kind of information, processing your social network and feeding it back into your inbox over here. Like, this is a dynamic list of who's important to me that's right at the surface of the UI, so I can immediately get to the people I care about. And then finally, Wallop is the most recent project, which I'll talk about in a little more detail, time allowing, where we're trying to blog or share content and share media in the context of this sort of implicit social network, where you're trying to bring to the surface who's important to me, and then filter the content that I care about depending on who I'm interacting with the most. That's one whole series of projects. Another series sort of falls more in the how do we support people's life cycles over the course of social events. So when we were looking at those sort of more implicit social networking projects, you sort of get this feeling after a while, but we're not really getting at people's real social interactions. Like, it's still this sort of desktop orientation. I'm in front of this machine, not interacting with them face to face. But technology should, how do we bring technology into supporting your moment-to-moment, face-to-face social interactions? And so there are a bunch of projects that sort of focus on that. Flipper, real-time photo sharing on a mobile device, Swarm, group text messaging, and this is. I love this project because it was the one that I got all my friends to use, and they become completely addicted to it, which is a lot of fun. I'd never had that experience before. When all your friends get addicted to a project and completely mad at you when it stops working. Here Now was one where we sort of, really strong feeling of deja vu. So Here Now, I think given this talk before. So Here Now, this was a project that really looked at, if we're all here together, we should be sharing really easily with each other because our laptops are co-located. And so how do we enable that through technology? Trace was something that, I should say all these projects, like a lot of different people worked on. Again, they're very team-based. So Scott, for example, Trace was primarily his project with an intern, looking at events and how. This was really interesting because he found that when you capture media at an event, and then you can go back later and see pictures of people from that event, people found that really compelling. The fact that you were at an event together really meant something very important about how you're connected to somebody, much more than just that you have a similarity of interest. So he did like a comparison of the different kinds of information that people found valuable, and that you're co-located at an event was really compelling for people. Panorama was like a live, we're all in an event together, we can post to it. And then Slam is one that we've been working on, Jordan Schwartz as well. looking at, for a mobile phone, we can all capture content and share it with the group immediately. But again, we're trying to model the software, use people's natural social interactions to help, inform the way that we design the software. So our groups are really lightweight, like how we, your social groups are really lightweight. So like who you end up hanging out with on a Friday night is a little bit different than who you end up hanging out on a Saturday night. It's a little bit different than a week from now. So how can we make it so that the software can really be responsive to that and be really dynamic in how you share, depending on just, subtle fluctuations in your social network. So it's all about supporting the sort of life cycle. Like we're apart, we're together, we're apart, oh, and then we're together. So just recycling over and over again. How do we support that? And I also want to say that people see the prototypes more just because they're prettier or something. But we do a lot of studies too, and over the course of the years, we've done a lot of studies. Some straight questionnaire studies, some studies where we actually did an experimental project where we brought this prototype into the laboratory, compared it to a control group, that sort of thing. And there's some things that sort of emerge across the studies, like, over the years. And some of these, might seem obvious now, but what's really interesting is that, we look at things like this. What kind of social information do people really care about? What are they attending to when they're looking at each other's profiles? Demographics are actually really important. Like, people have trouble talking to another human without knowing what gender they are. They have trouble talking to them without knowing what age they are. It kind of gives us, feeling of discomfort, like they don't have enough context for that conversation. Social status. This is one of the things that's, sort of American ideal of democracy or whatever, that social status doesn't matter as much as it does. But actually, again, people find it difficult to talk to people without knowing, well, what is our relative social status? How do people use these social technologies? Obviously seeking out and developing existing social relationships, but more than you might expect, integrating these technologies into their face-to-face experiences. When you're not emailing people that you don't know, you're emailing people you know. You're emailing people who are across the room from you right now. You guys are like communicating with people through the IRC channel, even though you're in the same room together. So it really is largely supporting my present people I care about the most, as opposed to keeping in touch with people who are at a big distance. Do social technologies have a meaningful impact on the quality of people's relationships? Yes. We've done a number of studies where we actually what is the quality of your social life? And people often report they have a stronger sense of community the more Yahoo groups they're in. They feel more connected to their romantic partner if they have an IM access to them all day long. And we do find some differences depending on real-time versus asynchronous. And there are some qualifications depending on if you're an introvert, an extrovert, etc. But on average, it has a very meaningful impact on the quality of the relations that you have with people, which has interesting implications for the, there's no, people talked about the digital divide often in terms of the educational context. But another thing to really think about is, well, how does technology, people with and without, how does it impact? Really? Okay. All right. Okay. So, how does it impact your the people who don't have access to technologies? How are they really disadvantaged in a way? And we should be aware of that and figuring that out and making sure that if they are, that everybody has access. Does rich media sharing meaningfully enhance? Yes. When people have photos, rich media, it does actually make a big difference in their feeling of presence. So I was going to talk about Wallop. I thought, okay. I just wanted to give a brief update on Wallop, which is that, it's one of our bigger projects, and we had a large-scale deployment. We've had thousands of people using it, and yes, people do find it fun, particularly if they're Chinese. We have a huge percentage of our users in Wallop are Chinese. So I don't know if I'm hoping most of you have at least heard of Wallop by now, but I'm happy to show it to you. So what we're doing with Wallop right now is we're doing an analysis of the usage in it, and then we'll be, writing that up. And then SLAM also, Jordan will be demoing that tomorrow. And this is the one that I was mentioning, mobile communication to a group and rich media sharing. This one in particular is really geared towards, what I was discussing before, really supporting people over the life cycle of their social experiences.